Vampires, the mafia. You're done. Sad. Ooh, do I want to get into this? And vampires. Hey nerds, what's up? So during the spooky season, everyone that I know watches some sort of spooky entertainment, whether that be a scary movie, scary TV show, spoopy. Doesn't have to be scary, but spoopy, dark, you get the idea. Well, another genre of entertainment that does a really good job of being spooky and scary is anime. When I looked up dark anime as a genre, there were so many different types of dark anime, whether it be dark fantasy, dark psychological, all that sort of stuff. Today I've compiled a few lists actually, about dark anime that I have watched, started watching, heard about, and I'm just going to be listing them from a scale of dark imagery and matter all the way to dark imagery, matter, and psychological, emotional baggage left on you after you watch it. So this side being like dark, scary, tolerable to leaves a pit in your stomach. First, we're gonna start with the anime that I have actually seen all the way through or watched up to where it's currently at. You get the idea. For the first one on this side of the spectrum of dark imagery, dark subject matter is YuGiOh. Yeah, laugh it up. When I'm talking about YuGiOh, I'm mainly talking about season 0 and the manga. While the American anime definitely dealt with some dark subject matter, including the 4th season with the Seal of Orichalcos and the last season, if you think about YuGiOh long enough, you kind of realize the whole premise is pretty dark. It's about possession. A young high school, I don't even know if he's high school, probably high school, Japanese boy unlocks a ancient Egyptian artifact and is then possessed by the spirit that was in the artifact. And you see him struggling with that even in the 1st season. But mainly, again, I'm talking about season 0 and the manga because those dive into a lot more darker material, like Yami Yugi in the American, he definitely has some dark tendencies, especially at the beginning of the show, but you see his relationship change with Yugi over time, which still happens in the manga. But in season 0, he is dark and twisted, and they're not just solving problems and situations via a card game, they are solving it with the card game, but the consequences are like what you see all of the villains do, like someone being tied to a rope on a roof, and if they lose the game, the rope's going to be chopped off and they're gonna fall off the roof and most likely die. The other episode where there's like the guy is covered in like kerosene oil and Yami Yugi lights a lighter or lights a cigarette for the guy, and anyway, he catches on fire. Like, there's so many dark instances where you're just like, ooh. And same with the manga, there's a lot more darker instances and things that happen in YuGiOh. So I definitely say that YuGiOh is on the dark list of anime, but definitely more at the top because, again, there are a lot of comedic things in it. There are happier, brighter things, but still a dark subject matter overall. Next up, we have JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Now, there's a lot of comedic, silly, outlandish things that happen in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but there's also a lot of dark instances and death and blood and vampires. That's the reason I wanted to put this anime on this list, because we start the whole entire anime based off of vampires. And of course they're different than our stereotypical Dracula, European, suck your blood with the teeth vampires. These vampires definitely do it a different way. A lot of dark things that happen. The vampires, they eat a lot of people or kill a lot of people, and while there are the very iconic JoJo poses and all of those silly things that do happen in JoJo's, as you progress through JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the first 3 seasons deal with vampires, and especially a very dark character, Dio, as well as some other dark, scary, iconic vampire and formidable enemies. And then you get to season 4 and we step away from the vampires, but we still deal with a serial killer, and it's very like murder mystery in town, which just fits the spooky season so well. As well as season 5, which we just deal with the mafia. And there are a lot of dark characters and things that happen throughout each of the seasons that definitely there are very dark moments. And so I definitely think that this belongs on the list of some spooky elements as well as dark elements for anime. The next one on this list is Death Note. I mean, just by the name itself, Death Note is definitely dealing with dark subject matter, and this is starting to enter into the psychological, emotional, what if you were given the power to kill people? What if you were given the power of holding people's lives in your hands? And this is what happens to a high school student like Yagami, who has to deal with the ramifications and definitely starts to develop a god complex. And there are dark, fantastical elements in it as well. And you see the ramifications and the consequences that Light's actions bring to other people and to the entire world, to be honest. And so as you watch both seasons or parts of Death Note, you deal with a lot of questions of like, is he right to do this? How are they going to stop him? There's a lot of things to figure out, and overall it is a very dark subject matter, dark imagery, and a very psychological, really makes you think about the consequences and what would happen if this was a real life situation. The next one we're diving into is Psycho-Pass. It's another psychological, heavy thinker with a lot of dark imagery. Something that really makes this one of the most dark anime that I've seen is not only the subject matter that's really hard, and you have a villain who is doing things in a way that isn't right, but his reasonings and kind of his whole drive to doing what he does, you kind of agree with. And the whole overarching situation and world that Psycho-Pass has built, you're dealing with these questions, and our main character is dealing with these really hard moral questions. And they're basically being police officers or detectives who are dealing with people who have, if you're on a spectrum of basically green to red, and if you're in the yellow to red zone, you're starting to show psychological, emotional, mental instability. When you get to a certain point, you're done. Then these detectives, these people come dealing with those people who are mentally unstable. So there's a lot of where is the threshold, where are lives important, who gets to choose who the lives are, and then there's a whole other part of the plot that I will not get into, where you just deal with who has the right to choose who is mentally stable, who's not. All of these big questions. And again, you have a villain that you're kind of rooting for, but you're also rooting for the good guys. There's a lot of dark things that happen because it starts as like a case-by-case murder mystery, crime show. And the other thing that's really dark, and something that I'm actually not like a super big fan of in Psycho-Pass, is their guns. Instead of just being regular guns that shoot bullets, they shoot them, but then, as anime does, it over-exaggerates things, and the death scenes are quite ridiculous and gross and over the top, and it really gets to you after a while, and you kind of, yeah. So it just depends on your stomach, how you deal with it. I do think overall the storyline and everything about Psycho-Pass was really interesting, but there were definitely some graphic things that I don't think needed to be in there, but that's why it fits in the dark anime list. Probably the number one darkest anime that I have seen so far is Fate Zero. Now, there's a whole entire Fate series, if you've heard about them, which deals with fantastical, historical, real life or non-real life historical figures that all become summoned by different people to win the Holy Grail. And the Holy Grail does things, and so far it's a super powerful item, So obviously they're all fighting for it. So it's definitely a brawl, free-for-all, last one standing wins the prize. Well, there's Fate Unlimited Blade Works, there's, I don't even know, there's Fate Apocrypha, there's so many different Fate series, and Fate Unlimited Blade Works is probably the most popular, but Fate Zero is the one that starts the story. It's the prequel to Fate Unlimited Blade Works, at least. So there are a lot of different characters, including very dark characters. Everyone's pretty morally gray or morally dark in this anime, and a lot of things are at stake. And again, it's a fight to the death kind of deal. So you deal with a lot of fighting, a lot of death, a lot of things that are really hard to watch. And you also see characters who may be more on the morally light side, and you see them start to get corrupt. Basically, overall, there's a lot of dark subject matter. There's a lot of psychological and emotional questions of morality and what's right and what's wrong. How would you deal with these certain situations? And then there are just terrible characters who, of course, are trying to get this power for their own gain, and other people who are just honestly wild cards and are doing it for the fun of it, which is really dark. By the end of it, you are kind of just left with a pit in your stomach, as I would say. And again, it's a prequel, so you know that certain characters are introduced and will continue on into the next anime, but overall, it's just a really, there's only a little bit of light, and that comes from certain characters and their relationship, and you see that grow healthily and ends bittersweetly, but that's like one piece of the pie, and everything else is pretty dark. Again, really leaves you not very happy. So if you do decide to watch this anime, even for just getting the full picture of Fate, the Fate series, then I would definitely recommend watching something happier after Fate Zero, because after you watch it, it sticks with you and you're just kind of left sad. The next two dark anime that I'm talking about are anime that I have started to watch but haven't completed yet. So I will start with Seraph of the End, which I've only seen the first episode, because by the end of the first episode, there's a lot that happens and you're kind of like, ooh, do I want to get into this? So Seraph of the End, there's a worldwide viral infection that infects everyone and kills everyone from ages 13 and up. Or I guess 14 and up, because anyone 13 and younger live. And the only people that remain are those children and vampires. And whether the vampires created the viral infection, I don't know, because again, I've only watched the first episode. But they enslave all of the children who live, and then you deal with our main characters. And they are trying to escape from their slavery, and they try to escape, and basically only one survives. And that is our main character, and that's how you figure out his hatred for vampires and his whole encompassing reason to live and to slay vampires from then on. So that's Seraph of the End. And the other one is Monster. Now, Monster is on the other spectrum, not so fantastical, but just real world issues and something that really could happen. And it focuses on a doctor or a surgeon who basically has to make a decision between two patients who are both in critical condition, and instead of saving a more higher figure in society, he chooses to save a child who is also in critical condition. He saves the child lives. Well, by the end of the episode, you find out that the child grows up to be a serial killer. And so the doctor has to deal with his choices and how his choices has basically allowed this child to live, grow up, and then all of these lives are lost. And so you deal with this psychological thriller, and I've heard very good things about it, and I definitely plan to continue to watch it, because while it is a dark subject matter, it seems very interesting and, again, a moral conundrum that you want to deal with. My next list is a list of iconic or dark anime that I've just heard from other people or the internet who says it's very good, or it's just a very popular dark kind of anime. So again, we'll start with the spectrum of like dark imagery, subject matter, but not like super haunting to all the way to very dark imagery, psychological, all that stuff. So to start off with, on this list, we will start with Castlevania, which if you have ever played those video games or have heard of Castlevania, you will know that it is about vampires and ghosts and any kind of dark monsters you can think of, and characters who are monster hunters and are willing to fight the dreaded Alucard. So there's a lot of vampires, there's a lot of different characters, different monsters, and overall this is just very action-packed, dark castle, stereotypical, spoopy, dark anime. The next one on this list is a more recent anime, Jujutsu Kaisen, and it deals with a world where dark emotions create these cursed creatures, and then there are other characters who have the ability to not only see the cursed creatures but can fight the cursed creatures. And there's a lot of very shonen dealing with adventures, and you have our main character who has like a pretty special ability, and he's under a mentor, and there's all these other things that are going to of course happen throughout, very much on the side of like Bleach or Yu Yu Hakusho, where you deal with like the spiritual or otherworldly realms, and are dealing with the otherworldly realms seeping into the real world and affecting people in the real world. The next one we're going to be dealing with is Tokyo Ghoul, and this one is another very popular anime. You deal with ghouls who feed on the flesh of humans, and then you have a main character who is both human and part ghoul. So you can imagine all of the shenanigans, the dark mental and emotional, I'm sure, trials that this character is going to go through, and just the idea of creatures eating humans is very dark and dealing with all of that subject matter. So that's why I put this one on my list. The next one is Madoka Magicka. Now, it starts as a very magical girl, seems very innocent, very cute, dealing with a bunch of little magical girls, but as very noted by now, it doesn't continue that way, and it takes a deep dive, a turn into a lot more darker subject matter and things that happen to them. So I've heard that one is like, watch it, it's great, but also it's really dark. The last two that I'm going to mention in this video are Helsing and Sheiki. Now, Helsing is a dark vampires in Europe, and our main character is definitely like an anti-hero slash maybe just a villain. I'm not 100% sure because, again, I haven't seen it, but I've heard many things about it. And we deal with, I think he's also Alucard, and they are hunting other monsters and other vampires throughout the story, but he is a vampire himself. So there is a lot of dark imagery and freaky images of vampires eating people and ghouls, and just a lot of bloodshed and fighting and darkness, but a lot of also psychological things that happen in that as well. But the darker one, more psychological, a little less actiony, from Helsing is Sheiki. And Sheiki is another vampire story, but it has to do with a lot of psychological subject matter. And again, the imagery is very dark and very spooky. So I've heard both good things about both of them, and also that they're both very dark. So those are my lists of dark anime that have been recommended to me, I've heard about, I've seen, and just wondering how you guys feel about dark anime. Have you ever watched any of these anime? Do you like dark anime? Or are you like me, who kind of usually prefer to watch shonen or slice of life or just happier times? But since it is the spooky season, I thought it would be good to talk about some spookier anime that are definitely out there, and it's a big genre in the anime world. Let me know if you guys have any anime that you recommend or have watched and was like, this is very dark. Comment down below. What did you guys think of this video? I hope you liked it. I'm a big anime fan as well, so I want to talk more about anime and stuff, and definitely thought that this was appropriate for the spooky season. So anyway, I have more spooky content coming up, so stay tuned for that. Thanks again so much for watching and hearing me ramble about a lot of anime, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey nerds, what's up? watches at least some sort of spooky entertainment and dark. So for our first mainly I'm talking about YuGiOh. If you think about YuGiOh in like, oh my gosh, that's the reason why I wanted to put this, oh my gosh, deal with those people who are mentally unstable. And it deals with creatures or ghouls that deal, or, oh my word. That is my lists.